Let's see. Okay. So I am part of Team Texas. Prior to joining the team, I was a math educator for 8 years. I taught upper elementary math and used ST Math in my own classroom. So everything that I share with you today is going to be stuff from my own classroom experience, hopefully stuff that's relevant, practical information. And my goal is that you leave with a few things you can easily implement this coming school year. I am also the face behind the blog and Instagram, We'll Teach for Tacos. So I will drop the link to my blog in the chat for you guys in case anybody's interested in checking it out. I do have a lot of other blogs on stations and my experience using stations. Here's some of what we will be covering today. As a teacher, I always spent part of my summer figuring out how I was going to revamp and make my math stations better. So I know that many of you are doing the same thing. Hopefully this gives you some ideas you can try this coming school year. We should have time at the end for Q&A, but you're welcome to pop those in the chat at any time, and we'll either answer as we go or answer at the end, whatever makes the most sense. I'm having trouble with my slides. There we go. So there are hundreds of different ways to do stations. These are just some of the more popular options that I've seen people use, that I've used. So I'm curious to know what station model you guys have used or are currently using in your classroom. So you should be able to scan that QR code with your phone, or you can join by copying and pasting the link to that website. And I'm gonna give you guys just a minute to answer that poll question so we can kind of get an idea of what everybody's done. And also once you, or at least I think, once you've scanned that QR code and accessed Slido, there's also a tab in there for Q&A, and I do have that pulled up. So if you want to pop a question in there at any point during the presentation, you can do that as well. I see some results coming in. But only 8 people have answered, so I'm going to give you a few more seconds. And I've actually used, like I said, hundreds of different ways. So I've used all those different options before. Let's see what you guys are currently doing. Oh, I can't see my own slide. Oh, I don't know if it's going to show you guys. Well, I can see it. So it looks like we're pretty split, with 33% doing a must do, may do, 19% using a menu or playlist, and then 50% doing traditional rotations. We're going to kind of quickly go through what those different ones are, just in case maybe there's one you've never heard of before, or you're not as familiar with it because you haven't tried it in your own classroom. So for must do, may do, what this typically is a list of tasks that students must do. And then once they finish their must do items, there are a list of options that they may do when they are finished. So this model gives students a lot of choice in when and what and how they're doing their activities. It also gives you as the teacher a lot of flexibility with who you're pulling or the groups that you're pulling, and then the amount of time that you're spending with those groups. So if there's a group you need to spend a longer amount of time with, you're able to do that. If you don't need to see a group for very long, you're able to do that. It's just a super flexible model. And then you don't have to worry about early finishers because the may do items are your early finishers. So it kind of takes care of that for you. Some things to consider would be how independent or not independent your students are, because this is a less structured station model. And then how are you going to check in with students as they're working to make sure that they are completing the activities and know what they are doing? I see a question. How many station options do you offer third graders? So I taught 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade different years, and I've done all different models, but in a traditional rotation model, I typically did 4 stations. If you choose to do a must do, may do model and you're using ST Math, then that needs to be on your must do list, not an option for students doing their finish. It needs to be something that they have to get done, either a certain number of minutes or a certain number of puzzles, but it needs to be on the must do side. For a menu playlist, a lot of this is pretty similar to must do, may do. So for this, students are given a choice of tasks to complete. They are allowed to choose the option or the order that they do those tasks in, or maybe they're given a choice of 5 tasks and they only have to complete 3 of them and they get to pick those 3. And it is typically completed over the course of a week or at least a couple days. It's not something you do just one day. So again, lots of student choice in this model, and for the teacher, the ability to flexibly group students and have flexible amounts of time with those students. Your early finishers are typically taken care of because they can just work on extra items from their playlist. And you only have to prep things once a week because it's lasting a longer period of time. But that being said, sometimes the prep is extra or seems extra because you're prepping more to last more days. So instead of just prepping one day of stations, you're prepping stations for your whole weeks, which can seem like a lot of work up front, but once it's done, it's done. Again, how independent or not independent are your students, because it is less structured. And then how are you going to check on students, especially if they're working on these things for a whole week? Like we can't wait till Friday to see that, you know, they haven't completed their activities. So just how are you going to make sure that things are getting done? So like I said, I've done a menu playlist, I've done a must do, may do, but these last few years I've landed on doing traditional rotations because of the structure that they offer. So in traditional rotations, students rotate through a set number of stations for a set amount of time. The teacher can be one of those rotations or can be separate and just pull students from rotations. Like I mentioned, it is a very structured model, which I found my students really needed these past couple of years, and so did I. The transitions, so when students are moving from one activity to another, it kind of offers students some downtime, like quick 1 minute downtime, rest their brain, get ready to jump into the next activity. It's helpful with time management, again, for both students and the teacher. And then it can be done as often or as little as you need. So you could do stations 1 day a week, you could do it all 5 days a week, and has some flexibility there. As far as your student groups are concerned, though, those are going to be a lot more static. So whoever your students are with, that's typically who they stay with for the whole station time. It is a little less flexible. If transitions are not solid, that can really eat up some time. So sometimes people struggle with transitions between activities. And then also with having something for students who finish their station activities early, making sure that's taken care of. So I think no matter what model you decide to go with, we know it's really important that we are meeting with our students in small groups. So I think we just need to answer the questions of how are you going to make that happen? So how are you going to make sure you're able to meet with small groups? And how often are you going to meet with those groups? If you are not muted, if you wouldn't mind muting yourself, we're getting a little bit of background noise. Okay, so with stations, setting expectations is really make or break. So we're going to spend a good chunk of our time here. And I have another Slido questions for you. So what procedures and routines do you think that students need to be familiar with in order for stations to run smoothly? So what are some things that we need our students to know how to do before we can make stations happen well? Awesome. How to use materials, how to ask for help, where to find materials, what to do and how to do it, how to work independently, yes, and be self-starters, know where to find the materials. Yes, how to get help from peers when the teacher is with groups. Definitely basic classroom behaviors, lots of solid class management. Awesome. So a lot of these things we're going to talk about and address. And if we have time at the end, if there's anything we didn't get to, maybe we can do a little bit of brainstorming. So a lot of you guys mentioned behaviors and knowing what the expectations are. So I think anchor charts are a really great tool to use during this time of setting station expectations, because we can have students, they have those as a visual reference, and we can review and revisit them as needed. So these are just some of the anchor charts I used in my own classroom. And then random tip for you guys, because this took me way too long, way too many years to figure out, but I always taught more than one group of kids. So I might see like 3 groups of 4th graders or 3 groups of 5th graders. And I would create 3 separate anchor charts. So I finally figured out that instead of creating several different anchor charts, I would just create one. And then I would have my students respond on sticky notes. We would collect those throughout the day on the poster. And then at the end of the day, I could look through all the sticky notes and kind of take a consensus on what my classes thought was the most important and what things I thought were important to really highlight and actually write down onto our anchor chart. So random tip. Okay, the years where stations were most successful for me was when I really took the time to slowly roll them out and set really firm expectations, routines, procedures. So I'm going to walk you guys through what this looked like in my own classroom. These first couple days, especially this first week, this isn't stuff that's meant to take your entire class period. This is supposed to just be a small discussion about whatever the procedure is for that day, and then move on to your regular math lesson. I know you guys have content to teach. We can't spend 2 weeks just teaching how to do stations. So work it in, do the discussion, do your practice, and then do your regular math lesson. Okay, so for day 1 of station rollout, we're just going to introduce the idea of stations to our students. And depending on what grade level you teach, that might look a little different. I mentioned you guys, I always taught upper elementary. So usually by the time students got to me, they had done stations in some form or fashion in the past. So they have a little bit of schema, a little bit of background knowledge on what stations are and what they look like. So we create an anchor chart for what do stations look like? What do they sound like? When someone walks into my room, what are they going to see you guys doing? What are they going to hear? And then we put that up in our room. And then the next day, we review what we talked about the day before. So what did we say stations look like? What did they sound like? And then we're going to create a second anchor chart for who's in charge of what during stations. So what is a student's job during stations and what is my job as the teacher? Just really setting those expectations. Then the next day, we're going to review those anchor charts again. And that's going to be a theme throughout, especially when we're setting these expectations. We're going to constantly be going back to those anchor charts and just making sure that those are crystal clear for students. We're also going to start talking about, especially if you're doing traditional rotations, what's it going to look like when we clean up, when we move around the room, and then when we go to our next activity. And then you're going to practice it. So I would have students pretend, so we are not actually doing any stations. I just have them pretend to be working on an activity with their table group. I would signal that it's time for cleanup. And then once all students were standing behind their chair, holding their materials, everyone was quiet, I knew that meant my students were ready to rotate to the next station. If it wasn't done correctly, we would do it again. I would tell my kids that I didn't want them practicing things the wrong way. We need to have good, solid practice. So I think it's really important to get that hammered in now while you have time at the beginning of the year before you're really in the thick of things and don't have as much time to stop and practice things like practicing rotating. The next day, we're going to look at those anchor charts again and practice rotating again. So just that pretend practice where everybody pretends to be working on something, clean up, transition. Transitions can really suck up a lot of time. So we just want to make sure they're quick and clean so we can move on to our next activity. And like I said, I spend a lot of time on this at the beginning because it's easier now than once we're really in the thick of things. And then day 5, we're going to look at those anchor charts again, and we're going to practice being at stations again. But this time we're going to actually do some activities, but really, really, really simple activities. So the goal of today isn't necessarily to practice math this time around. It's really just to practice being at stations and what that looks like. So I keep them really simple and shorter than normal. So if my stations are normally 15 minutes, then today we're only going to be at each station for maybe 8 minutes. Just to get the feel of things. So some ideas of stations I've done in the past that are very simple. At Game Station, I would do place value blocks and have students build something and then find the value of their structure with their blocks. So it's still math. It's just that's not the reason we're doing these stations. And then at technology, if you've got ST Maths that have been going, they could get on that. If you haven't got that into place yet at the beginning of the year, then maybe just some kind of getting to know you activity on Google Classroom or Seesaw or whatever your school uses. At practice station, I might do a really simple addition and subtraction activity. And then at teacher table, I'm still going to have an activity there. I'm just not going to be leading a lesson. So again, maybe like a getting to know you or color by number, something that's pretty simple for students. Again, short, simple, teacher's not actually pulling small groups. Students are just going to be at wherever that location is in the room. Okay, the next week. So we are going to review again those anchor charts and practice rotating. So just what does it look like when we clean up, when we transition, all of that. And then we're going to do real stations, quote unquote, because we still want them to be pretty simple. Teachers not going to pull a small group yet. We want to make sure that we're available to answer questions, make sure students are on task, meeting expectations. But we do want students doing some type of activity at their stations. You could do the same ones as last week or something new, but keeping them pretty simple for now. And then the big thing this day is at the end of class, we're going to debrief. So we're going to all come together as a class and talk about, how did that go? What did we do really well today at stations? What are things we still need to work on? Did we have people off task? Were our transitions a little bit sloppy? Those kinds of things. And then the next day, we're going to revisit that conversation. So what were things that we talked about that we said we did really well? We want to do those really well again today. And then what were things we said we were going to do better today? And then we're going to do real stations again. You could do the same ones. That would be my suggestion. So you don't have to spend time explaining directions. You can really just get into practicing those. And then we're going to reflect again at the end as a class. Did we improve on what we said we were going to get better at? The next day, reflect again. I think that student reflection is really powerful because it's them telling you what they did well and what they didn't do well instead of you just like nagging on them. They can kind of do that themselves and help each other out in that way. So how did things go yesterday? What are we still working on? And then today, the teacher is going to spend a little bit of time with a group unavailable. So we need to talk to our students about what should they do when the teacher is unavailable. So what is the routine going to be? What is the procedure going to be for when you are with your group at a small group? And today you're going to spend a short amount of time with small groups. So I wouldn't actually be leading a small group lesson. I would probably just go sit with that group while they're working on whatever they're working on. That way I'm still available, but I want to get my other students used to the idea of me not being right there with them. Then the next day, we're going to basically do the same thing as day 8. Lots and lots of practice and gradually just increasing the amount of time that the teacher is unavailable to students because we're teaching a small group lesson. And then the goal would be by day 10 that we're ready to rock and roll and small groups and stations are pretty well in place and we can go on through the rest of our year using small groups and reviewing and revisiting those anchor charts as needed, especially after longer breaks and such. I just want to give you a few ideas for how you might schedule out your math blocks on days that you're wanting to do stations. But before that, I have this quote from NCTM. So it says, seemingly everyone has their own preferred lesson format. But the fact is, there's not one mathematics lesson format that should be implemented every day. Adhering to one model can be limiting and may not best support your students' learning because the format is taking precedence over students' needs. Effective teachers use more than one type of lesson format. So that being said, if you do stations, you do not have to do them every day. The fact that that you want to do stations shouldn't take precedent over your students' needs. It's going to depend on what you're teaching and what your students really need for that day. So just because you choose to do stations, don't think you're locked into doing that every single day. Okay, so for me, 90 minutes was always ideal for math, but I know all of you may not have that long. It is definitely still possible to do some variation of stations with a shorter math block. So these are just some ideas of how you might structure your time. If you have less time, you don't have to do 4 stations. You might do less stations if you're wanting to do a traditional rotation. So maybe only 2 or 3, or 2 one day and 2 the next day. Or maybe a different station model would work better for you than traditional rotations. With a shorter math block, you might have better luck doing a must do, may do. And just keep in mind, you don't have to do stations every single day. So one year I did only have 55 minutes to teach math, and we still did stations. We just didn't do them every day. And on the day we did do stations, that's all we did that day. We spent the majority of our class period in those stations. So just going back to that quote, whatever you decide to do doesn't have to be what you do every single day. So in that daily schedule idea, I mentioned a warm-up time. So I just want to give you guys a few ideas for that. I've never been a mini lesson person, and maybe that's not like the right way to do stations. It just never worked for me. My mini lesson always ended up being not mini, and then we didn't have time for stations. So I think if you don't do a mini lesson, that's okay. I think if you do a mini lesson, that's okay. It just didn't work for me. I did like to start with some type of warm up though for my whole group, just to kind of get our minds going and ready to do math. So you're probably familiar with some of these: problem of the day, number of the day, puzzle talks, number talks. So some of those probably sound familiar. I wanted to give you a little bit more information on puzzle talks in case those are new to you. So puzzle talks are pretty similar to number talks. So in a number talk, the teacher would present the students with a problem. Yes, I am going to share the slideshow with you guys at the end, actually. And then I think it might be posted somewhere after that, but I will put the link in the comments at the end. Teacher presents a problem to students, and then the students solve the problem to themselves in their head. Teachers sometimes use these different hand signals for students to show where they're at in the thinking process. And then students will share their answers and share their thinking with each other. The teacher will document that either on anchor chart paper or on the whiteboard, share student strategies, and then the class will decide on a real answer for the problem. In a puzzle talk, instead of the teacher presenting a problem, the teacher is going to instead present an ST Math puzzle. Again, we're going to give students time to solve that puzzle themselves, and then they will share their solutions and how they got their solutions. So lots of defending and justifying our answer, our reasoning, and our strategies. And then students are going to decide on a solution. The nice thing about a puzzle talk is that you can try out the solution, and the puzzle will actually show students if that was correct or not. So they get that animated feedback from the puzzle itself and not from the teacher. So with puzzle talks, there's a couple different options for how you can put these into practice in your classroom. You can essentially use any ST Math puzzle that you want. We have these puzzle talk planners, and I will drop the link for that in the chat. So if you wanted to pick a puzzle that you've seen students struggling on, or it goes with a skill that you're currently teaching, this would help you plan that out. If you are newer to ST Math or new to puzzle talks, we also have scripted puzzle talks. This just isn't going to be available for every single puzzle, but there are lots of options. This is just going to give you a little bit more guidance as you are getting started because it's completely scripted. And I dropped that link in the chat as well. Okay, so once you're into stations, we're going to need to pick what activities we are doing. So I have this quote from Donna Boucher from Math Coach's Corner. It says, note that as you move away from whole group instruction, students are spending increasingly longer amounts of time working independently. In fact, they might be spending the bulk of the math instruction block working in workstations. Think about the implications of that statement. If we don't carefully plan our workstation task, this time is largely wasted. So I don't interpret this as meaning your stations need to be complicated, but we do want them to be meaningful. They're not intended to be busy work. Students are with you for maybe 15 minutes at most, and probably at a different station for 30 to 45 minutes. So we need them doing something that is meaningful. These are some of the different stations that I've used in the past. I never had a fancy acronym. This was the names of them. It just was what it was. I'm not sure why you can't access the link. Hopefully somebody else can hop in and answer that. Okay, so for technology station, ST Math, no prep on the teacher's part. You can have students just work through their grade level journey. If you want to assign things, then you would be able to do that if you wanted them working on a certain skill that you're currently teaching. The best thing about ST Math is that the time that they're in there is they're learning. It's time spent learning. I loved knowing and feeling confident in the fact that my students were actually doing math during that time and not like wandering around an imaginary world or dressing up an avatar or shooting an alien. They were actually doing math the whole time. So I felt really good about putting them on ST Math. And then my students helped me create this poster for our do's and our don'ts. They were the ones who came up with all these things, and I would remind them of that often. So you told me you weren't going to be playing around, like that's what you guys said. I didn't say that. Or you told me that you were going to pay attention and do your best work on that. So definitely have students be the ones to create your anchor charts. Don't just give them what to do. For practice station, lots of different things you could do here, but we do want to make sure that this is something that was previously taught and not a brand new skill for students. We want the majority of our students to be able to confidently work through whatever we put at practice station. They're going to be there for 10 to 15 minutes. We don't want them sitting for 10 to 15 minutes practicing something wrong. Also consider the length of the assignment. We want, or at least I always wanted, the majority of my students finishing that assignment. I do not like keeping up with who's done, who's not done, extra papers floating around. So quality over quantity, and try to make it for something that the majority of students can finish. And then make sure at practice station, something else that will help your students with finishing and being able to complete work to the best of their ability is by providing the accommodations that they need if they're students who need accommodations. So whatever they need to be successful, maybe that is making sure they have their supplemental aids available. Be sure to provide their oral accommodations if that's needed. Since you're not there, you're gonna have to figure out how you want to do that. I always used Seesaw for my kids who received oral accommodations. I would just snap a picture of the worksheet and then record myself reading it. We use Seesaw a lot, so my students were really familiar with how to navigate and get to what they needed, and they would listen to me reading it on Seesaw. This would also be a really great time to do math journals if you're wanting to have your students do more writing or journaling. This would be a good time to have them do that. We have some really great journal reflection pages on the site. I'm going to put it in the chat box, but I know a lot of you over there are saying the links are not working for you. So we'll try and see what happens. I'm curious to know if the very first link for my website worked for you guys or not, and if it's just the ST Math ones that are giving you trouble. So let me know. I don't know what's going on there. I do have all these things linked in the slides that I'm going to share with you at the end. So if you can't access them now, hopefully it will work when I share the PDF at the end. Okay, for game station, it doesn't have to be an actual game. I called everything a game. So we just want to make sure whatever they're doing, they're spending more time on math than they are the game. So you could do task cards, you could pair a game board with a worksheet, math mazes, some kind of fact fluency game, lots of options for what you could do here, because I would just tell my kids it was a game, regardless of if it was a game or not. For teacher table, this is the only station you should really have to be spending much time prepping. You're going to be prepping this anyways. So even if you were teaching a lesson in whole group, you're still prepping that. Now you're just teaching it in small groups. So whatever your whole group, the meat of your lesson would have been, you're doing the same thing. You're just presenting it to a smaller group of students. Don't overthink the grouping of your students if you're doing a traditional rotation model. I know I said that was one of the things to kind of think about, is that your groups are a lot more static. There are lots of ways you can differentiate other than grouping your students by ability. You can differentiate by the questions that you're asking, by the pacing, by the difficulty of the problems that you're giving students, or by having, an extension or challenge type thing for students who are moving through the curriculum more quickly. So being able to differentiate with questioning was huge for me, because it meant I didn't have to worry about changing my groups all the time. Okay, we are kind of getting towards the end of our presentation here. We're just going to look at a couple common pain points and some ideas for how you might troubleshoot those. So since we know students are spending an increasingly long amount of time away from us, we want to make sure that we're holding them accountable. So some ways to do that are by setting a class goal. My students were always motivated by class goals, and I help them keep each other on task and motivated instead of me having to do all of that. So being able to work towards a common goal. These are some of the trackers that I've seen on Twitter and Instagram. There's so many creative people out there sharing how they are monitoring student progress in ST Math. The way I found these is by searching our hashtag and through people who have tagged us. I was never that fancy. So for me, this is what I had permanently up on our board. Our goal was always to get to 90 minutes by the end of the week. So I wanted students ending each day with a certain number of minutes. So I would just write this on the board to kind of help them break down, because 90 minutes is a big goal to get through. So we would just chunk it out. By Monday, I needed them to have 20. By Tuesday, I needed them to have 40, and so on. You could do it by puzzles as well. Minutes are just what worked for us. We also have some really great individual trackers that are on the website. Again, I'm going to put the link, but no promises. Hopefully that will work. I really love the GG one in the middle. Students can write in their own goal and then color as they reach that goal. So these are some great options for letting students hold themselves accountable independently. Having students reflect on their own work and their own actions is really powerful. These are some of the teacher-created reflections that I've seen. The one on the left and the right on the sides are specific to ST Math and students reflecting on their effort in ST Math. And then the middle is just more reflecting on their attitudes and following procedures. I really like that that middle one is digital. That would make it really easy to share with students grown-ups at home. Transitions can be a really big pain point if you're doing traditional rotations. Can really derail things if transitions are not tight and clean. So I always use these skip counting songs. These ones are my favorite because they're written to modern day songs that the kids know and love. There are lots of other skip counting songs out there. These are just the ones I use. So when we were ready to clean up, I would start singing and students would join me while they were cleaning up. So there was no off-topic chatter or people doing something they weren't supposed to because they had to be singing with me. Stations can sometimes be or seem like extra work. So this is just some ideas for ways you can minimize your prep because teachers are already doing too much, right? So for me, putting papers into plastic dry erase sleeves or using whiteboards was something that saved me a lot of time because it meant I didn't have to be standing at the copier. I only needed enough copies for the people at my table, so 4 or 5, and then we would just stick them in those sleeves. And teacher table was something we did together anyways, so I didn't have to worry about students turning in work, me going through the work, just less paper trail and things floating around. Another way would be to plan for digital activities. So same thing, we're doing it all together. I don't need to see it ever again, less to keep up with. Avoiding small group interruptions. So we know that when students are away from us, they might still need us sometimes. And I saw some of you guys mention the Ask 3 before me. I think that's great. That is one of the most popular. These are just a couple other options. So you could have students who need help or have a question. They could write their name on a sticky note and then come put it at your teacher table next to you. You will still have to teach them how to walk up and leave the note without interrupting. Everything needs to be explicitly modeled, but then that way you know whenever you get a free moment, that's who needs your attention and has a question or needs help with something. Another option would be to give the students that you're meeting with at small groups something to do for 2 or 3 minutes while you go check on everybody and make sure that they know what's going on and how to get started. So some ideas for that. Again, depending on what grade level you teach, but you could have students practice reading larger numbers or identifying place values in those numbers, some sort of fact fluency game, but just something quick and easy for them to do while you go check on everybody and see that they were able to get started. Other ideas for, minimizing the number of interruptions. Make sure that the familiar activities at others, make sure to have familiar activities at your other stations, things that students know how to do and can confidently do. And then again, we know students are going to need help. So just plan for it. Plan for a time to go check on students. Technology issues, all the technology issues all the time. My answer to my students was always, did you turn your iPad off and back on? And most of the time that would fix whatever the problem was. But you might want to have something for students to refer to themselves. Most of the time they're able to fix their technology stuff way better than we are. This just would be kind of a guide of steps for them to work through as they do that. Thank you guys.